I know. This thing isn't working.
Okay, I have one. The other one?
I got it from her.
Okay.
Skill issues. Oh, no. That's for the Zoom. Gotcha. Probably a little All right. Okay, sir. Thank you. This is going to be a little bit of a maybe different presentation than what is normally done at a SIHR meeting. In fact, I almost call this an anti-presentation presentation. There's no PowerPoint, there's no video. My presentation is about a period before any of that nonsense was even invented. So I also don't know that I necessarily believe the research I found, but I'll let you guys decide on all that. In 1936, Chick Morey told the McGill News how hockey was invented. To explain how, on November 10th, 1879, I originated rules for shinny on your own side, it was necessary to revert to events which took place during the several years prior to that date. Morey explained that from the middle of November until early in January, he and the local boys played shinny on the river opposite the city of Montreal. The shinny season seldom lasted for more than 6 weeks. And the reason for that is because the snow would fall and it would make it impossible to skate. It was a case of skate, skate, skate as hard as you can go. Take a rest, go after the puck once again until you were thoroughly exhausted, stated Morey. Morey stated that the only infallible rule from the game of his youth was never to hit the puck left-handed. If the guy was bigger than you, he might slash you in the shins. Morey was a first-year, 115-pound mining student at McGill University that November, when his friend William Fleet Robinson, nicknamed Robbie, had returned from a summer trip visiting relatives from England. As he entered the McGill gates off of Sherbrooke, Robbie said, "Chick, I want you to come to my room tonight, for I picked up a fine game over in England." Robertson brought home a book of English rugby football rules, and he and Morey studied each one carefully, criticizing them from every point of view, until they were both satisfied the game could be successfully played on the ice. The next day, Chick said he told his classmate Dick Smith about the new game, and following further discussions, Smith undertook to write out the rules, which the three agreed upon. The article also stated that Morey was from the class of 1885, but no record of McGill graduates includes his name. In fact, it appears that Chick fell in love with Eliza Clements, and they had their first child, Bob, in Montreal in 1884. It was soon after Bob's birth that Chick moved to Baker City, Oregon, to work in the stock raising business. You city folks probably prefer the term cowboy. Why Baker City, Oregon? Two of his older brothers were already there. Life got better for Chick in his 30s. He moved to Portland in 1891, and he was one of the 26 original members of the Multnomah Amateur Athletic Club. Today, that club claims to be the largest private athletic and social club in the United States. He became a father a third time in that year, when William Jr. was born that September. To celebrate, the multi-sport Chick won 3 gold medals in the 440-yard run, the 880-yard run, and the 1 mile. His time in the mile was 5 minutes and 11 seconds, which might have been the best in the Northwest, but was 1 minute off the world record at that time. He was also a champion swimmer from his summers in Montreal, so William became the swimming instructor at the Multnomah Club. He also acquired U.S. citizenship in 1895. In January 1898, Chick and his oldest son Bob left the family and went gold hunting. He arrived in Skagway, but would leave like so many without success. He, along with a group of Portlanders, including the former chief of police, mined in Atlin, British Columbia, about 60 miles to the east of Skagway, just south of the Yukon Territory boundary. On July 31st, 1898, gold was discovered at Atlin, and about 3,000 hopefuls moved into the previously untapped area. The father was less successful on the trip than his son, and he returned home and then fathered his 5th child. Bob, on the other hand, moved on to Dawson City. Although he did not strike it rich in the gold fields, he did strike a pretty good fortune selling newspapers. Bob was in Dawson at the time when President McKinley was assassinated, and Bob snapped up all 500 copies of the newspaper and took them down to the Yukon and made $1,000, or nearly 52,000 Canadian today. Bob's fortune changed, however, as he was forced into working on a ship and ended up in Belfast for 158 days. Chick presumed his eldest was lost. Meanwhile, his hockey-creating friend, Robbie, left Victoria on the NSS Danube to inspect the mines in Atlin. William Fleet Robertson became the chief geologist in British Columbia, but it's unknown if the two mining students ever ran into each other. Spirit broken, Chick returned to Portland, which is home to several rivers with strong currents, which led to several deaths every year. Two men started with $500 each and built a public bath with what we would call today a public pool to provide a safe place for people to swim. Morey, an expert swimmer, and his wife Eliza were hired as superintendents to keep the kids safe. Then at age 44, Eliza died January 10th, 1907 in Portland. After her death, Chick coached his youngest son in swimming for a short time, but then turned his attention to local politics. He ran as a Republican in Portland's 21st precinct. His platform was medical legislation, but his voice fell upon deaf ears. Finances must have been bleak, for he stopped running for the pool and publicly disowned his children's debt in 1908. The next year brought hope again. On May 20th, 1909, he incorporated the Banks Timber Company in Portland. Chick was one of the first to own a car, and he helped Bob rush to the altar when his bride hopped on the midnight train from Centralia, Washington, to Portland. Miss Helena Dunkley lied to her disapproving parents and said she was heading north to stay with a friend, when she actually headed south to get married. By the time her parents found out, she was wed and a happy couple had departed on their honeymoon. Gosh, I should be better than this. The honeymoon was over fast, though. With children grown, Chick was living as a boarder in 1910, and because he taught swimming for a salary, Chick was stripped from competing by the Amateur Athletic Union in the United States. On January 2nd, 1912, the state of Oregon closed the Banks Timber Company, stating it had not filed required reports for at least the previous 2 years. Chick left his kids behind and moved back to Montreal. It was here where Chick joined with a group of American attorneys that he had met during his time as a Portland clerk. He was now a land locator, and the attorneys sent letters to potential applicants about the United States government's lawsuit against the Oregon and California Railroad and its successor, the Southern Pacific. The U.S. would require the railroads to sell the land back at $2.50 per acre in 160-acre lots. The attorneys offered claims to approximately 2,200 people for an average of $100 per location. Approximately 1,000 of the claimants were not U.S. citizens, but Canadians sought out by Chick. On July 25th, 1916, Chick and 7 associates were charged by the federal grand jury in San Francisco for mail fraud, as the government made no intention of reselling the land to the claimants. Chick was traveling from Montreal to New York at the time of the hearing, and on August 1st, 1916, he surrendered to authorities. It took a couple of hung juries and a few years for the decisive trial to occur, but finally, Chick paid his $2,000 bail and was expected to plead. And then he bailed on the bail. The hockey originator was no longer in the sin bin. He became a fugitive. All of Chick's co-defendants appeared in San Francisco for trial when U.S. Attorney dropped the bombshell. There was not enough evidence to convict. By a plea arrangement, the other defendants had to pay a fine. William Morey's file, like his $2,000, just disappeared. The 1920s saw him travel cross-continent a couple of times. He claimed to have attended military games as a 61-year-old in 1922 and entered a swimming meet, claiming to win first place in the high dive for form and fancy diving. In 1927, Chick was driving through Colusa, California, about 60 miles north of Sacramento. And it is the first found recording of Chick Morey telling the story of being hockey's inventor. Morey claimed that in 1879, he suggested putting English rugby football rules into ice shinny, making the game of hockey the fastest in the world. The last line in the Calusa article probably states all one needs to know about where he was heading on his last journeys. Morey is a salesman. Clean living pays, he declared. Chick next appeared in Turlock, California, about the halfway point on a drive from Fresno to San Jose. And he introduced himself with swimming stories, as well as being the inventor of hockey. As Montreal newspaper editors and McGill University sports information directors were trying to connect how this game had exploded in popularity, with NHL expansion at that time into New York, Boston, Detroit, St. Louis, and Chicago, and minor league expansion growing across the continent, and European hockey starting to gain a foothold in that public's imagination, Chuck's version of events started getting reported. None of the versions were heavily scrutinized, though, because the argument never was centered on who invented hockey. Claims of Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, Halifax, Montreal, and Kingston ran rampant for nearly 80 years, as Canadian civic pride was based more about the where than the honoring and understanding of the who and the whom. By 1940, Chick Morey was living in a rented apartment in Los Angeles at 3407 South Flower Street, now on the campus of USC, about a mile and a half from Crypto.com Arena where the LA Kings play. He also shared his full story with the Angelinos, although the facts were kind of changed slightly. In the 1940 version, Robertson had graduated the year before, was impressed with field hockey, not rugby. And Chick said, I devised a set of rules combining shinny, field hockey, and rugby football, and asked Dick Smith, a fellow McGill student, to write them up. And those are the rules, practically unchanged, that are used today. Morey said he stopped playing hockey in 1884, but when he was still swimming and skating in the 1940s, and even attended the occasional hockey game in the Southland. It's still about the same game, Morey said, but I am proud to say that we didn't attempt the rough stuff that mars present-day play, and sometimes maims players. Also, we didn't do that much lobbing of the puck, but we had some tricks that they don't know nowadays, and we were in better condition. Substitutions were rare. But it's a great game, and I am mighty proud to have a part in its origin. William Lewis Archibald Morey passed away on May 22nd, 1947 in Los Angeles. He was 85. There was no obituary. All right.
So here's my one question for you.
Sure, fire away.
How much do you believe of the story you just told of this charlatan everything was his idea?
I got it. I've studied this for a long, long time, 25 years off and on, interviewed a lot of people over it. And I've come to the conclusion that almost everything that you guys might have heard, read, or seen is somewhat true. That at the time, you have to put yourselves back into that time. And in 1879, there probably was no knowledge of an organized game of McGill at 1875. It wasn't like they had a microfiche they could go look at. Those kids that were in 1875 graduated and moved on. The game spread, but I could see how somebody could believe that they were the inventor. But we also know that the rules changed. And we also know from JP and his work that the game has obviously evolved. And it is definitely a game of evolution, not a game of creation. But in evolution, there are points of demarcation. There's a lot of places where something that you might recognize today, you would not have recognized in 1879, for example, as the same game.
Was that guy actually a McGill student?
Yeah.
He was?
Yeah.
But we don't know if he graduated.
Oh, we know he didn't graduate.
Okay.
McGill has a book of graduates that they printed in 1928 that listed every single McGill graduate in history, where they were, where they lived, what they majored in, and even the people that had passed on, and he's not in it.
Well, what's the evidence he was there?
Good point. Good point.
I mean, he's
well,
fabulous. I'm wondering how much he...
McGill, again,